No, I look back, I see like 3 cop cars, they're radioing in for backup. They got shotguns and stuff pointed at us. You know, they made us all get out the car one by one. But in the process, Ghostface misinterpreted the directions. So he tried to get out on the passenger side, and that's when they clicked the guns on us. So I'm thinking, is they gonna kill us, or what did I do? Yeah. They got us on the concrete with our faces down on this hot concrete. They told us all turn our faces to the right. So this guy's coming out the store with a camcorder. I'm thinking we on an episode of Cops or something. Nobody read us any rights or anything.
The 1990s were wild enough for Wu-Tang Clan, fame, chaos, non-stop touring. But what nobody knew at the time was that the FBI had an active file on the group, not rumors, not fan theories, real federal documents. And buried inside those files were even wilder claims that RZA and Raekwon themselves were connected to not one, but 2 1999 murders on Staten Island. It sounds impossible, outrageous. But that's exactly what a government informant told the FBI, sparking a years-long investigation into the most influential rap group on the planet. Federal agents believed the killings were retaliation hits ordered after 2 men allegedly robbed relatives of RZA and Raekwon. The story stayed hidden for years, buried in sealed paperwork, whispered about in legal circles, until a leak dragged it back into the light. But to understand how the FBI ended up chasing the Klan like a crime syndicate, you need to go back to where it all started, a neighborhood the Bureau believed produced both rap stars and killers. Let's go. The FBI's secret Wu-Tang files. From the outside, Wu-Tang looked unstoppable. Platinum plaques, worldwide tours, a movement unlike anything hip-hop had ever seen. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Something the public wouldn't learn about for more than a decade. Around 1997, federal agents in Manhattan and Brooklyn quietly opened what they called a preliminary enterprise investigation into the Wu-Tang Clan, the official suspicion that the group wasn't just a rap collective but a potential criminal organization. The FBI didn't come up with this from thin air. They were reacting to a wave of violent incidents linked to the neighborhoods the Klan came from, Staten Island's Park Hill and Stapleton projects, places that were already under surveillance long before anyone touched a microphone. And as Wu-Tang's fame exploded, the FBI claimed the violence around those neighborhoods didn't slow down. If anything, they thought it got more complicated. According to their own notes, agents began compiling dossiers on various affiliates, tracking who they hung out with, who they argued with, and who might have had a motive to settle old Staten Island beefs. They pulled phone logs, they interviewed street informants, they monitored money coming in and out of razor-sharp records. Their theory was simple: follow the violence, follow the money, and you might expose something bigger. Of course, none of this was public. Wu-Tang fans were celebrating the success of Wu-Tang forever, not imagining the FBI sitting in an office thinking the group was laundering money through record sales. But inside those sealed files was the first hint of something explosive, an early note referencing retaliation motives tied to Wu-Tang members. A hint that federal agents believed some of the Klan's biggest names weren't just entertainers, but possible shot callers, and that suspicion would hit its peak in 1999. When 2 killings on Staten Island brought the FBI swarming into Wu-Tang's universe like never before.
It's the same typical shit. You go to the hood and niggas, 10 blocks away, niggas don't know you, niggas don't fuck with you, niggas will gun you if they feel like you in the way, you know what I mean? So we always stayed on our side. So when RZA formed this alliance, the names that was brought to the table, it was definitely spoken on like, yo, I don't really fuck with ghosts. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's a crook. You know what I mean? We tell it how it is, you know what I mean? But that didn't mean that he wasn't talented. You know what I mean? And he wasn't a man of respect. Ghost was always, he was both. You know what I mean? Could have been a crook, but he's one of them niggas that's coming for you. It's like, if they say he's coming, he's coming. You know what I mean? So, us always sticking our head out and watching out for these niggas.
The 1999 Staten Island killings. The year 1999 was already tense in Staten Island. Turf disputes, robberies, and retaliation hits were part of the rhythm of street life. But 2 killings that year would ignite federal interest like never before, and eventually land the names RZA and Raekwon directly inside FBI paperwork. The first incident was the murder of Corey Leafy Booker, shot dead in Staten Island under circumstances the NYPD immediately labeled targeted. A few months later came the killing of Jerome "Boo Boo" Estrella, also described as a targeted hit. On paper, these 2 murders weren't connected. but on the streets, a rumor spread fast. Both men had allegedly robbed relatives of high-profile Wu-Tang members. At first, the police treated the cases like typical Staten Island street retaliation. But then an off-the-record tip changed everything. A confidential informant claimed the robberies weren't random and the retaliation wasn't either. The story they told detectives was wild, that people connected to Wu-Tang took the robberies as a personal affront, and word traveled back to two of the group's most influential members. According to the informant, the robberies were disrespect on a family level. And in neighborhoods where loyalty is currency, disrespect comes with consequences. This whisper eventually made its way into NYPD intelligence notes, which were later forwarded to the FBI. Suddenly, the murders of Leafy Booker and Boo Boo Estrella weren't just street cases, they were potential pieces of a bigger narrative. By late 1999, both agencies were privately treating the killings as possibly linked, not proven, not confirmed, but in law enforcement language, the words possible connection were enough to escalate, and that escalation would lead to a bombshell statement an informant delivered years later, one that directly named RZA and Raekwon as the men who supposedly greenlit revenge.
You see what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
when you think Wu-Tang, you think Staten Island. You don't think Staten Island and Brooklyn. You think Staten Island.
No doubt.
Like,
No
why?
doubt.
Why was that?
I think because Wu-Tang ran with the whole Shaolin, and Shaolin was a word that we use on Staten Island to describe Staten Island. So, you know, the Shaolin style and Shaolin 36 Chambers, everything what we did resorted back to Shaolin. So I think the people kind of just took that as like, yo, they all from Staten Island. They all from Staten Island. But, you know, actually we all from different places, man, and just came together on Staten Island.
The informant's bombshell statement. The FBI's quiet investigation took a sudden, dramatic turn in 2004 when a confidential informant sat down with federal agents and dropped a claim that would follow Wu-Tang for decades. The informant said that the murders of Corey Leafy Booker and Jerome Boo Boo Estrella weren't random street hits at all, but contracted retaliation ordered after the victims allegedly robbed relatives of RZA and Raekwon. This was the quote agents highlighted in their notes. The killings were done at the direction of RZA and Raekwon. For the FBI, this was the kind of statement that could blow a case open. For the informant, it was a chance to trade information for leniency. But for the hip-hop world, once these files leaked years later, it was a direct hit to the legacy of two of Staten Island's most influential artists. The informant claimed that after the robberies, word spread fast, traveling from Park Hill to housing projects across Staten Island. They alleged that associates of Wu-Tang took the robbery as a deep personal disrespect, the kind that had to be answered. According to the statement, money was put up to get revenge, an idea that echoed the street politics of the era, but had never before been linked to Wu-Tang in any official way. Federal agents didn't just take the informant's word blindly. They began cross-checking phone records, following money movements through razor-sharp records, and pulling old NYPD case notes. They wanted to see if anything could tie these claims to reality. But like many informant stories in the early 2000s, there were gaps. Big ones. Still, the allegation was enough to justify expanding the investigation. And even though the FBI never filed charges, the mere idea of RZA and Raekwon being named in connection to a pair of murders was sensational enough to keep agents digging. The question now wasn't just whether the murders were retaliation, but whether the entire Wu-Tang organization was part of something bigger, a possibility federal agents were increasingly convinced they could prove.
Without that knowledge itself, we would have never knew how to even do that. You know, they didn't teach us that in school. They falsified it, but it's like we, by getting that, we saved ourselves, man. I was locked up back and forth for about maybe 5 years, doing a year here. I did a year, then I came home for a couple months, went back, did another year, a year and a half, then I came back again, did like 2 years. Just kept going back and forth, 8 months. So I finally got it all out of my system.
Wu-Tang under surveillance. By the early 2000s, the FBI's interest in Wu-Tang Clan had evolved into something much bigger than a pair of unsolved murders. Agents weren't just looking at 2 incidents. They were now examining the entire ecosystem around the group. And this wasn't some casual inquiry. According to internal notes, the Bureau believed Wu-Tang might be operating like a structured enterprise, using fame as a cover while certain affiliates handled the street-level activity. To push this theory, the FBI used a familiar playbook: surveillance, financial monitoring, and informant-driven intelligence. They began tapping phones tied to associates on Staten Island, tracking suspicious cash movements in and out of razor-sharp records, and studying who visited which studios and when. Agents even flagged the group's travel patterns, especially trips involving large entourages, trying to match movements with incidents happening back home. They weren't alone. The NYPD, already immersed in tracking Staten Island crews, regularly shared information with the feds. Detectives who had worked violent crimes in the Park Hill and Stapleton projects for years began looping the FBI into old files that involved people loosely connected to the Klan. The idea wasn't that Wu-Tang itself was pulling triggers, but that their fame and influence might be shielding people who were. And then there was the ODB factor in 1998. A separate case briefly and loosely tied Old Dirty Bastard to a murder suspect, an accusation that fell apart almost instantly. But to federal agents, it reinforced their theory that Wu-Tang's orbit was messy, unpredictable, and worth watching. The more they looked, the more they convinced themselves there had to be something there. The surveillance expanded, the suspicion deepened. But for all the manpower and hours poured into the investigation, one problem kept coming up: nothing stuck. And that crack, the gap between rumor and proof, would soon become too big for the FBI to ignore.
Right? And think about the Wu-Tang legacy, and think about how many families is eating off of that legacy. You know what I mean? I'm talking about thousands, right? That legacy has went on from the music to sparking other MCs to figure out their careers, to inspire other producers and MCs.
Why the case collapsed. For all the noise the investigation generated behind closed doors, the case began falling apart almost as quickly as it had been built. On paper, the allegations were dramatic. 2 murders, an informant naming RZA and Raekwon, and a federal task force convinced they were onto something big. But the deeper agents dug, the more the foundation started to crumble. First, the informant at the center of everything became a problem. Federal prosecutors reviewing the file flagged him as unreliable. He had a history of giving information in exchange for lighter charges, and several of his past statements had turned out to be exaggerated or outright false. When investigators tried to corroborate his claims about the 1999 killings, they ran into a wall. Phone records didn't match the timeline, money trails didn't connect to anything suspicious, and NYPD paperwork from the original cases didn't support the idea of a paid retaliation hit second. Witnesses who once seemed willing to talk suddenly weren't. Detectives revisiting the old murders in Staten Island found that people who had previously offered vague theories now refused to participate. Some had moved away. Others said they were afraid of retaliation, not from Wu-Tang, but from neighborhood figures who had nothing to do with the group. What the FBI had interpreted as silence from a criminal organization was in reality just the regular street code of late 90s New York. And then came September 11th, 2001, a turning point that changed the entire direction of federal law enforcement. Terrorism, not hip-hop crews, became the government's focus. Funding shifted, personnel reassigned. A case that once felt urgent was suddenly low priority. By the time the FBI reviewed the file again in the mid-2000s, it was clear they didn't have enough to move forward. No charges, no indictments, just paperwork filled with rumors, dead leads, and unproven connections. But even as the case faded internally, the damage lingered, because years later, when those sealed documents finally leaked, the public wouldn't see the collapse, only the accusations, media leaks, and the public backlash. For years, everything about the FBI's Wu-Tang investigation lived in sealed folders, hidden behind blacked-out pages and classification stamps. No fans knew about it, no journalists had seen it, and even most people close to the Klan had no idea how deep federal agents once dug into their world. That silence lasted until the mid-2000s, when a combination of FOIA requests and a completely unrelated court filing cracked the door open. In 2014, during a murder trial involving a Staten Island defendant, a federal prosecutor accidentally referenced an old FBI note tying the Wu-Tang Clan to potential retaliation killings. That mention triggered a buzz in the courtroom, and it didn't take long for reporters to start digging. Soon, XXL, NY Daily News, Complex, and a wave of hip-hop outlets were publishing explosive headlines. FBI files link Wu-Tang to 1999 murders. RZA, Raekwon named in federal documents. The public didn't see the shaky informant, the collapsed case, or the lack of evidence. They only saw the accusations, and for a group as legendary and iconic as Wu-Tang, the backlash was immediate. Fans were stunned. Some defended the group instantly, saying the FBI had a long history of targeting successful black artists. Others weren't sure what to think. The internet did what the internet always does. It ran wild with speculation. At the same time, older interviews resurfaced where Wu-Tang members talked about how authorities treated them. Cappadonna once said the police viewed Wu-Tang like a gang instead of a music family. Raekwon brushed off old street myths about the group, laughing at how exaggerated they became. RZA himself had warned that the government often singled out rap labels. All of it suddenly felt connected, and fans started viewing these old interviews through a new lens. The story had officially escaped the paperwork and turned into a public storm no one in the clan ever expected. Wu-Tang Clan's rise versus law enforcement's obsession. By the time the FBI placed Wu-Tang Clan under the microscope, the group had already become a cultural earthquake. Their rise from Staten Island's Park Hill and Stapleton projects to global superstardom was something America had never seen before. 9 MCs, dozens of affiliates, and an entire brand built on mystique, street philosophy, and martial arts-inspired identity. But in law enforcement's eyes, that success was part of the problem. The more the clan grew, the more federal agents believed they were looking at something too powerful, too organized, and too unpredictable to ignore. The FBI had a long history of targeting music movements they didn't understand. From jazz clubs in the 1940s to rock acts in the 70s, federal surveillance often showed up wherever young, influential men of color built massive followings. And in the 90s, with the rise of gangsta rap, the government's attention shifted again toward record labels, tour money, and artists who came from neighborhoods already under heavy police pressure. Wu-Tang fit that profile perfectly. Charismatic leaders, coded language in lyrics, a huge fan base, and roots in areas the NYPD considered high risk. Around 1995 to 2000, agencies like the FBI, DEA, and ATF were already investigating other major labels: Death Row, No Limit, and later Murder Inc. To them, rap labels looked like potential hubs for laundering money, moving drugs, or hiding street connections behind corporate paperwork. So when Wu-Tang exploded, federal agents didn't just see artists, they saw a structure. What made Wu-Tang unique was how self-contained they were. They managed their own businesses, ran their own studios, and helped their own people rise out of poverty. To fans, it was inspiring. To the FBI, it looked like hierarchy, the exact thing they associated with organized crime. As the clan gained power, the narrative took on a life of its own. Fame amplified the myths. The myths attracted the police, and the police attention created new myths. It became a loop no one could escape. And soon, those myths would grow into a theory the internet still refuses to let die. The unproven theory that won't die. Once the FBI files leaked, the public reacted in the most predictable and unpredictable way possible. Some people dismissed the allegations immediately. Others dove straight into speculation. And a small corner of the internet became obsessed with the idea that Wu-Tang Clan was secretly operating like a criminal syndicate. No arrests, no charges, no evidence strong enough to hold up in court. Yet the theory refused to disappear. Part of that persistence comes from the culture of the late 90s. Hip-hop was surrounded by mystery. Street legends grew faster than actual facts. And Wu-Tang, with their coded slang, their massive crew, and their gritty Staten Island roots, became a magnet for wild stories. Every affiliate, every neighborhood rumor, every old beef started getting woven into the idea that the group was running something much bigger behind the scenes. Online forums took things even further. Reddit threads, hip-hop conspiracy pages, and YouTube breakdown channels amplified the claims long after the FBI had closed the case. Each time the files resurfaced, people treated them like new discoveries, as if the accusations had just dropped that day. The informant's statement became clickbait. Headlines left out critical details, like the fact that prosecutors rejected the claims or that nothing in the investigation actually tied RZA or Raekwon to the murders. And then there was the Wu-Tang mystique. Their mythology was already larger than life. Kung fu themes, dark imagery, a massive network of affiliates. All of it made it easy for people to believe they might be involved in more than music, even when the facts said otherwise. The real danger was how quickly rumor became memory over time. The distinction blurred. People stopped saying an informant claimed and began saying Wu-Tang did. That shift is how unproven allegations became part of hip-hop's permanent rumor mill. But the truth, the real truth, is far more complicated, and the legacy of those accusations would ultimately change how the public viewed the group forever. The legacy of the FBI files. By the time the FBI files finally hit the public, Wu-Tang Clan had already cemented themselves as one of the most influential groups in hip-hop history. But the sudden exposure of old federal notes linking RZA and Raekwon to 1999 murders created a new layer to their mythology. One neither the group nor the fans ever expected. The allegations were unproven, the claims shaky, the evidence non-existent. Yet the impact was real and lasting. In a strange way, the leaked documents added to Wu-Tang's legend. For some fans, the revelations became just another example of authorities targeting successful black artists. Others saw it as a reminder of the environment the group came from. The streets of Staten Island, where violence was woven into daily life long before anyone thought about record deals or global tours. And to a certain segment of hip-hop listeners, the allegations only amplified the Wu-Tang mystique, feeding into a darker, more cinematic narrative the group had never asked for. But for the members themselves, the fallout meant something different. It pushed them to speak more openly about their early years, the chaos surrounding the crew, and the constant surveillance they experienced once fame arrived. RZA leaned deeper into storytelling, producing documentaries and scripted series that reframed Wu-Tang's origin through their own lens rather than law enforcement's. Raekwon continued clarifying old myths in interviews, reminding fans that most street rumors were exaggerated beyond recognition. The leaked files also changed how the industry viewed law enforcement. Artists realized how easily allegations, even baseless ones, could take on a life of their own. It influenced future conversations about privacy, surveillance, and how black success is often scrutinized more aggressively than anything else. In the end, the FBI's Wu-Tang investigation didn't result in charges, convictions, or courtroom drama, but it left behind something far more powerful, a cautionary tale about rumor, reputation, and the fine line between fact and legend in hip-hop history. And for Wu-Tang, that legacy, like their music, will echo far longer than any case file ever could. Facts, myths, and everything in between. When the FBI first opened their files on Wu-Tang Clan, they thought they were uncovering the inner workings of a criminal empire. What they actually exposed was something far less dramatic and far more revealing. The investigation produced no charges, no arrests, and no solid proof tying RZA, Raekwon, or any Wu-Tang member to the 1999 killings that sparked the government's interest. Yet the leaks still hit the culture like a shockwave, because sometimes an accusation, even one buried for years, makes more noise than the truth ever could. The leaked documents created a storm of debate that still pops up online today. Some people point to the FBI's long history of targeting black artists and say the Wu-Tang investigation was just another example. Others get caught up in the mystery, drawn to the idea that a legendary rap group could have been at the center of something darker. And then there are the fans who grew up with Wu-Tang, who see the accusations as nothing more than misunderstood street history twisted into a sensational headline. But what the files really showed was the gap between how law enforcement viewed Wu-Tang and how Wu-Tang viewed themselves. To the group, they were 9 young men escaping poverty through talent, hustle, and vision. To federal agencies, they were a massive, unpredictable force coming from a world they already considered dangerous. Misinterpretation met paranoia, and the result became one of hip-hop's most persistent rumors. The truth is simple. The allegations were never proven. The case fell apart. And the Wu-Tang Clan continued shaping culture long after the federal spotlight faded. If anything, the story serves as a reminder of how easily fiction becomes fact when it's written in an official document, and how important it is to separate what's real from what was simply recorded. Now it's your turn. Do you think the FBI genuinely believed Wu-Tang was involved in those murders? Or were they looking for something that was never there? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you learned something new, and subscribe for more stories that expose the moments hip-hop history tried to hide.